Welcome. We're the Lorcana Twins, and it's time for another Lorcana Twins talk.
That's right. And what are we talking about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about some multiplayer because at our local store we play a lot of multiplayer. They also do hold, 1v1 nights as well, but that's typically on the weekend, and we're busy a lot of weekends or unable to make it, so we end up doing a lot more multiplayer at the local store. And I know maybe that's not typical of a lot of other stores out there for Lorcana, but it is a fun way to play, and so we thought we'd share some decks with you that we've been playing this season.
Yeah, and I think it's a really cool game mode because you get to build some unique decks that wouldn't work very well in the 1v1 format. And while we're both really into the one-on-one type of gameplay, it is really fun just coming up with some cool decks that you can try and use a wider range of your card pool.
Yep, and then the new set, Archazia's Island, is right around the corner, coming out in 2 days actually from the time of us filming. So we are very excited for that, and we'll just touch on that a little bit at the end, what our schedule looks like for the release weekend. But yeah, so far we'll kick it right off with this multiplayer list here.
So this looks like one that you came up with.
Yep, and I've found that aggressive decks tend to do pretty good in multiplayer usually. I'm not typically much of an aggressive player most of the time, at least when it comes to 1v1s. I mean, sometimes I'll try that, but I like some mid-range or control-y builds usually. But here, I think, when you're against potentially 2 or maybe even 3 other players in your group, because we usually do multiplayer groups of 3 or 4 players, sometimes 5 at the biggest that we've ever done. But yeah, it's just you can't really try to sit and control that many players' boards, especially with removal cards like, let's say, Strength of a Raging Fire, where it's a single target and it might deal with one, person's character, but there's just too much to try to handle with that. So aggro, tends to work pretty well. So that's what I kind of went with here. And this one was having pretty good success over the last few weeks, racking up some wins. I thought it was cool getting to play 8 Lilos in a deck. Just getting that 2 lore. And then for another 1-drop, I thought Moana, just questing away if they want to trade into her. I mean, she'll probably trade with anything, that costs about her same level. So that can kind of deter opponents from, wanting to challenge into her. She's only
a heavy hitter.
More. Yep, so just quest away. And then Simba can protect that Lilo pretty well. I mean, sometimes I'm surprised that everyone will take their first turn and maybe a couple people played a Popsicle and maybe someone else missed a 1-drop. So maybe, you get a free quest out of her. Or maybe you just protect her with Simba and get, at least a couple quests out of her. So that's nice. And then Wendy's kind of a little safer against Steel. And then sometimes, people just aren't playing much for evasive. So, Pegasus might be able to get 4 to 5 lore before he's answered. So sometimes he might not look as appealing as a 2-lore character to play, but it really racks up more over time. And then there's a lot of burn in this deck too, which I thought was fun. So Baloo, whenever he's banished, you can get 2 lore just like that. And Donald makes a character quest for more lore. Surfer Mini again with that evasive strategy sometimes is really good. And I think Sisu in multiplayer, it's pretty unique because she actually gets an extra strength for every card in each of your opponent's hands. So even if you have just 3 other opponents and they've all got 3 cards in hand, Sisu's going to be swinging for 10. So that's really impressive, and it's hard not for her to be pretty big and strong in multiplayer. And if anything else, she just quests for 2, and they maybe have to sink 1 or 2 characters into her. Rapunzel's just great in every Amber deck, and then Sven's kind of fun to keep some of your characters protected. And then Super Goofy is really nice in multiplayer, especially because when you have 2 or 3 extra opponents, there's a lot of characters that are in play. So it's more likely that he'll have something to challenge unless everybody's holding all their characters back. So I think he's really valuable in multiplayer. And then there's just a really cool synergy with the Raya, because if you have Raya in play, then you can, on your next turn, play a Goofy and run him in. Hopefully challenge something, gain 2 lore. Then you can ink for a turn, and then use Raya's ability to ready Goofy again if he wasn't taken out by whatever he challenged, and then he can challenge a second time and get you 4 lore in the same turn. So that was really cool. And then Kita, I guess, just kind of protects your board if the situation is looking right for that. Hopefully you're not against too much Ruby decks, with brawls and big Sisus and stuff. And then with all these aggressive characters, hitting the discard pile, Chernobog's really fun. And there's only actually 10 uninkable cards in this deck, so I was never really worried about that. Never had any inkability issues. So he was really cool as well, just to get a big 9/9 body out if people have done a lot of removing. And then a Pirate's Life, as we've seen in 1v1 lately, especially in Sapphire Ruby, like that card's just been very big. And I really like it here too, because not only does it get you 2 lore, which might just close the game out or really get you closer if you've lost your whole board or whatever, but it also subtracts 2 lore from every opponent, so not just one. So again, in multiplayer, it hits even harder than in single player. And just threw one little Hades in there to be an extra copy of whatever you might want at a given moment. Like maybe you've rushed in a Goofy before, and I find that people usually want to take Goofy out as soon as they can and not let him get a second challenge in. But you could grab a Goofy back to hand if you're almost winning the game, so that when you have enough ink again, you can replay the Goofy and close the game out. So a lot of fun combos with this deck, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun to play. And now we'll go to one that you made.
So pretty early on in the set, this was kind of the first multiplayer deck that I tried. I really wanted to use the new Hades that was in Amethyst. I just thought it'd be kind of fun to give your opponents kind of a conundrum, like if they can't remove the Hades, do they really want to banish your other characters? But if they don't, you get to keep questing them. So I thought I would kind of build it in a way that could kind of protect your board, so that when you get to the Hades turn, you can try to really kind of lock your opponent out into a bad situation. So I like Ward in multiplayer a lot, just because there's usually, with 3 other opponents or 4 other opponents, there's a lot of people who might have removal for your characters. So Duke Weaselton there in the 2-drop spot, he's just really nice to be a cheap character that you can play, and unless someone's playing Grab Your Swords, he usually is able to survive and get 2 lore, and that's 10% of your win condition there. Before him, I usually play one of the typical Amethyst 1-drop cards, so all of those can replace themselves. So it's nice, like, to just be able to quest, and then you can always banish them in some way, typically, to keep your hand full of options throughout the game. The White Rose is really nice in this deck, because just trying to burn for a lot of lore. Also Tinkerbell, kind of like what my brother said in the previous deck he was talking about. It's nice to have evasive units in case your opponents aren't really using any. And questing for 2 is a pretty aggressive amount of lore for that cost.
It adds up.
And then Alice is really nice for aggro decks now, because that ward makes her extremely hard to remove before she's quested, and the fact that she can give ward when she quests lets you protect your genie if you play that on the following turn, and that's another good way to get 2 lore. And in this deck, I also really like protecting the Yzma, so if you've played your hand out really aggressively, you could give Yzma ward with Alice, and then the Yzma on the following turn, if you want, can exert to draw up to 3 cards, so you can kind of play out or ink out the rest of your hand and then refill with a bunch of options. In one of the games I played, Tadashi for the 3 cost, he also comes in pretty big handy, because either he quests for 2 and kind of annoys your opponent, or if anyone takes him out, then suddenly you get to ramp him and a card off the top of your deck, I believe, so you almost get like 2 ink out of him, and then suddenly you're able to play like your Hades very quickly after that. So that just kind of accelerates what you can do with your board. So he's a fun card as well. Probably his weakness would be like getting a bounce back to hand with a kit or something like that. That can really slow you down. But what I like to do in this deck too is if you can just go Tinkerbell into Genie as well, then getting Aurora down on turn 5, she gives ward to your evasives. So now if your opponent isn't playing evasives, then you kind of get to just keep questing freely. And Tinkerbell and Genie really add up fast. So that's kind of a nice way you can threaten the opponents there. I put 2 Bell in there because I think it's also, while this is mostly an aggro deck and I don't really want to be controlling anything too hard, it's still nice to be able to, on play, kind of move some damage around from different people's boards and kind of take out a threat if possible.
Because if you're not winning the race, it does help to be able to have some way to interact with an opponent. So I like that as well.
Always good to have some aggressive or defensive lines, and I think she's more on the defensive side there. But a nice lore, for the cost pretty much, and a good stat line. And then Baymax, if there is a lot of steel damage going around, I know a lot of people locally sometimes like to play Grab Your Swords. Some of these bigger willpower characters like Aurora or Genie, they can survive, and then if you just curve out a Baymax, you can kind of heal and get 2 burst lore when he comes into play, plus then keep your other character healthier so that they'll live longer.
Yeah, I think any kind of like instant lore gain is really big in multiplayer and single player too. We see how popular Merlin Goat and cards like that are. But yeah, really good in multiplayer too.
So I think the biggest success I had with this was when I was able to go Tinkerbell into Genie into Aurora, and then the Aurora wasn't answered, and then I was able to play Hades to follow that up, and suddenly, there was evasive warded units, and Aurora needed to be answered, but if she was, then Hades gives me 2 lore from that, and then Hades couldn't be attacked or used any actions on due to him having wards. So all of that really was a nice combination. And then just for some other quick lore gain, I used Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom. And then Vision of the Future is nice to kind of look for whatever you might need in the situation. So whether you need some free lore with the Rose or the Gathering Knowledge, you can kind of look for that. Or if you're running out of cards, you can look for some card draw. So all in all, I thought this deck cycles really effectively and puts out a lot of threats and draws a lot of cards, and all of that helps bring some pretty good success.
Mm-hmm. And next up, another deck you made.
Yes, I love the Hercules style decks.
Absolutely.
This is definitely something that I've had tried before. Basically the Megara Liberated one. She's the 5-cost one, kind of in the middle of the screen. She has ward, and when she quests, she gets 2 lore, but if you play a Hercules character, she gets to ready, and there's no restrictions on what she can do after she readies, so she can quest again, she can sing, she can just remain ready. So that's
pretty scary.
Yeah, so they can't be challenged. And so what I wanted to do with this deck basically was just see if it got any enhancements from the recent set. I think Go-Go Tamago is really nice in multiplayer because opponents will be challenging at times and leaving some damage on things, and so having the ability to do burst lore.
It's just a lot more targets for it.
Yeah, there's more targets, whereas in single player it's maybe easier to play around Go-Go a bit, but in multiplayer each opponent can't really control what everyone else is doing, so she helps you add a lot of lore there. I wanted to try the new Hercules, the 6-cost Uninkable. I know he got a lot of attention as being probably one of the worst legendaries in the set, but I do appreciate that he has ward, which I think is great in multiplayer. His stats keep him really healthy against people playing like Sisu style decks.
And another fun looking card for this deck is the Pack Tactics, which again, if there's a lot of characters in play with damage, you're going to get a lot of lore.
Yep, instantly. I didn't want to rely on that card, so I only played one, but when it comes up, it can be pretty effective in multiplayer. The other thing, Calhoun, I think is really nice because while I mostly want to be aggressive with this deck too, she's a great way to kind of be aggressive while you're dealing with the board. So I like that. And then when I had been playing for the previous couple weeks before I put this together, there had just been a lot of the Ruby ramp style decks happening. So I added a couple Hey just because it was pretty consistent that if I found that, I was usually getting a free ink, and that can be pretty impactful in these colors that don't really have ramp normally. So you could get to your Megara faster or get to your Pegasus or some of your bigger shift characters if you didn't find the shift line earlier.
And the Megara really seems to be one of the main win conditions with this, and it's cool because counting here, it looks like you've got 21 Hercules in the deck. So
yeah, I had quite
almost 1 in 3 is going to be a Hercules.
I had, I'd say 2 or 3 games so far in the past month or so where it was coming down to the final turn, and like I could quest Megara to 18, but I needed to top deck a Hercules for my turn in order to win, and both times it happened. So it was really fun. Another thing that's cool is the Philoctetes. Whenever you play a hero, you can get a free lore off of that, and he also gives all your heroes Challenger, and so all the Hercules in the deck are heroes, and also there's a few other ones like Go-Go and Calhoun. So it's actually surprising how much that comes in handy, where the Calhoun can suddenly swing for 4, and that takes out a lot of threats in the meta, like Sisu, the 3-cost one, and then Daisy Ducks. They go down to Calhoun when you have Phil on the board. So really fun. And then I just played the Pegasus line as well because it's nice to have an evasive from turn 1 that if your opponents aren't answering it, that can really help ramp up the lore. And then I also like that Prince Philip for ward. Ward always seems good, so I ran some of that, and yeah, it was a really fun deck.
And next up, here is a Queen and King deck, Amber Sapphire.
Yeah, so this is one that I originally was playing back in set 5 when the 5-cost blue or Sapphire Floodborn Queen came out, and she gets an extra lore for each other the Queen character you have in play. So this set, though, I thought the new Judy Hopps is kind of fun because you can play her the turn after you play the queen if you just played the queen naturally for 5. And then the queen has ward, so if you have a big board of other queens, she can quest for a lot, and then Judy can ready her at the end of the turn. So that was one way I wanted to try to protect her there. Also, the queen sensor core is really fun in this deck because there's so many queens, and there's also, Rapunzel as a princess. So when you use the core, you get a free lore if you start your turn with a queen or a princess in play. And if you need some card draw, you can always exert it and use its effect to try to look at the top card of your deck, and if it's a queen or a princess, it goes into your hand. So that's pretty cool too. And a lot of the queens in this deck actually have ward, which again I really like in multiplayer.
Very strong.
It's just nice when your opponents, like, they might want to interact with you, but a lot of times they just cannot. So the 4-cost queen there's really fun because I think you get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck and add each queen that you find there to your hand after revealing it to your opponent. So sometimes you can draw 3 off of that. And then I'm kind of supporting all of the queens here with King Candy. In case you find that shift line early, you can kind of look at the top 2 cards and take 1. So it's nice to set up kind of what you want to do on your future turns.
And I think Blast from Your Past is really cool here because with a lot of queens, I mean, you can put them all back into your hand from the discard. So a good way to use that card, which hasn't really seen much play yet. And
that's something you can sing with the Judy Hopps or the big Hades if you get him out. I pretty much put him in just for fun because there's a decent number of villains in here, but the 4-cost Hades is a great Rapunzel target. So I didn't want ramp to be like a huge deal in this deck, but sometimes you can TPO right into the Hades on turn 3, and the 3/6 is very hard for opponents to remove, and they probably won't want to waste much on that. And so if he sticks around, he can easily make a nice trade and then just get some heal out of Rapunzel to keep your hands going.
Yeah, I think in general in multiplayer, a lot of times, like, unless a character can, or a player can take out a character, all in one go by themselves or with the characters they have, people don't always want to make deals or, try to rely on, well, if I punch into this character, will you also finish it off? I mean, sometimes that does happen if it really needs to, but yeah, I think also trying to look kind of unassuming, like, people might look at this deck and go, oh, you're playing Amber Sapphire and Queens, like, oh, that's, maybe that's not so much of a threat, but then that can work to your advantage if people, team up against other people that are, ahead at the beginning. But then once you get close to winning yourself and they realize, oh, maybe I should be focusing on you now, then those warded characters can really come in big, where it's like, well, these might just get me across the finish once you've decided to start focusing me. So,
and what I really like too about this deck is the Queen Fairest of all, the 5-cost Sapphire Floodborn. She can shift on any of the other queens, and like many of them, like I said before, have wards. So even the 2-cost one has wards, so it's very hard for them to deal with some of those if you want to protect them that way. And at any point, this might shift up and get lore. And also the Amber one from set 2 can shift up and threaten some nice trading value while she quests. So I think there's a lot of fun, like, different lines you can take with it. And then I like the Grand Duke as well, the 2-cost Amber card up there, because there's times where you can, just that extra strength protects your warded queens, because the Sapphire one becomes a 3 strength. So, if they're playing Sisu, they can't reduce her strength due to the ward, and then, she can survive. And that's just pretty helpful. I know a lot of people locally like to play Amber, Sapphire Ruby as well. So, and then just a little bit of lore burst with the Baloo there, and also with Baymax, just some options.
And I will say about the Queen Sensor Core, I also played a Princess and Queen deck this set with it was actually Amber Ruby and using the Sensor Core, and I think it's just another fun way, an alternative way to get lore every turn based on whether or not you have a queen in play at the start of your turn. So just any alternate way to gain lore is really nice, and especially again with it being an item, if there isn't a lot of item removal happening at the table in the group you're playing with, then that might just stick around and be really valuable. So, but yeah, another cool looking deck. This next one, so I had actually started with this. It was based on a shell that was actually for single player or 1v1, because at the start of the set I was really excited about the idea of doing a Floodborn Tinkerbell deck with the Amethyst Steel combo because of the new 3-drop Tinkerbell that has the 2 lore and is evasive. Just the idea that you can put that down on 3 and start questing for 2, but then threaten the shift of the big Tinkerbell that might kind of freeze your opponent from questing. But I decided because I didn't want to move too much around, I just kind of tweaked that list a little bit that I'd been playing for single player and brought it over to multiplayer. So something I did is I just threw in some of the Pascal, because again, I think evasives can be great in multiplayer, not always, but I thought it'd be nice if, like as you can see here, if you went with a Pascal on turn 1, you could go right into a Blue Fairy on 2, and then a Tinkerbell on 3, and a Genie on 4, and you've got like evasives all the way up the curve there. So I mean, if you could stick all that, I mean, it's pretty likely that even if they have a couple answers for some of them, the rest of them will stick around and quest evasively. And then I've always just loved the Blue Fairy card in concept, and the fact that now there's the 3-drop Aladdin. So if you play Blue Fairy on 2, now you could play Aladdin on 3 and draw a card. And then the Bell, I think again, that we touched on earlier, another Floodborn here. So if you have Blue Fairy down, you get to draw a card. You also can move some damage. And then the Beast, Tragic Hero, great card from set 2. Also lets you draw a card on play if you've got the Blue Fairy in play. And then, that, if it goes unanswered, will draw you an extra card every turn. And there were definitely a couple of games where the value train of all the draw I was getting off of the Blue Fairy that people couldn't touch, mixed with all the Floodborn draw, really helped propel this into the end game to close it out. And then I did throw in an Yzma just as a way to point blank remove anything in case there was like a really big problem character. And you can also use it on, let's say use it on your own rabbit, then you draw 2 off of the Yzma trigger plus another one for the rabbit leaving play. So, it's a good way to draw some cards yourself too if you ever need to. And then I had to play the full set of the Giant Fairy Tinkerbell, of course, because that was kind of what the deck concept was. And I threw in one of the new Tinkerbell, Queen of the Azurite Fairies.
Yeah, and she's a 5/6, so
for
that's
fun.
Really nice with being evasive as well.
Yeah, her actual effect for giving your other fairies an extra lore, probably I didn't expect that to ever really come into play. I guess it could give your Blue Fairy an extra lore if you've still got that around, but I just thought it would be cool as well to have the option of playing that in the deck. And yeah, it is a big stallion, and you can shift it on any of the other Tinkerbells too if you needed to swing up. And at the time it was a really new card, and people would probably be surprised to see it. And then just a few friends for draw, and then along came Zeus for some removal if anything ever really needs to be removed. And then Grab Your Swords, really like that in multiplayer because there's extra characters lying about, and a lot of people do like to play aggressive decks, so this might take out a lot of characters. And then when you combine it with the Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and do 3 to everything, that's really good there too. So just a really fun deck. And up next,
next up, I called this one Robin's Roulette, and I played this Robin Hood style deck a lot in Shimmering Skies. I just thought the Robin Hood is such a cool mechanic where when you quest, you get to look at the top 4 cards of your deck, and you may play an action that costs 6 or less for free. So that's always kind of like a high roll, fun scenario whenever you quest, seeing if you get any extra value out of that or not. Mm-hmm. But because he's slanted more towards aggressive style gameplay, I wanted this to be a pretty aggressive deck as well. So I went with 4 of the Cursed Merfolk there to just kind of get the lore train going early. And if you don't find that, Pegasus is nice too, in case they can't attack into him, being evasive. And then Fred's kind of cool as well, because if your opponents are playing more board-centric decks and less removal, then a lot of times they end up challenging him, and you effectively get at least 3 lore out of him since he gives you 2 when he's banished in a challenge. Clarabelle, I like that to break items. There's a lot of Sapphire decks in multiplayer that try to win off the dime and a big pile of items, so sometimes you need Clarabelle to break that. And also it's a nice shift target for the Floodborn Clarabelle that can draw cards up to, however many are in one of your opponent's hand. And it's always nice in multiplayer. Usually there's at least one opponent who is drawing a lot of cards and doing more control-y style things, so they probably have a bigger hand than you when you can get her out. So that's always nice to refill there. Gazelle, I put a couple of her in because she can protect the Merfolk by giving it evasive. So if you can get 4 lore out of that merfolk before it can be challenged. Like, that's really nice. Go again, just love her in multiplayer for a quick lore burst towards the end of a game. And if you have to play it on turn 2 because you have nothing else, it's still evasive, so you might get to keep questing it every turn for a while. LeFou is another way kind of to protect the cursed merfolk on turn 2, and later on in the game, if you have 6 ink, it's really nice to combo LeFou with the Super Goofy, because then you can try to get 4 lore just off of those 2 cards together. Oftentimes I would try to play out my hand aggressively here, so I like the 3-cost Clarabelle as well, since it'll usually always draw you a card. Assuming that one of your opponents has more cards than you do. And
the LeFou looks very fun with Robin Hood and Super Goofy.
It is. Yeah, he can kind of protect Robin Hood after he's quested. He's only cost 2 to play, so you can definitely afford to do that. Minnie Mouse, just to put down some evasive threat, and then I would put more of the Tigger in here, though, with 4 copies of him, because he gets an extra lore every time you play an action. So sometimes you can have him out on turn 3 and then have Robin Hood out on turn 4, and if both of those have been able to survive, then if Robin Hood pops off and hits a lot of actions, like some of the best things you can do here is if you hit a You Came Back, you can ready your Robin and then quest for 2 more with Robin, so you've already got 4 off Robin and you haven't even paid any ink yet, and every time you cast an action, Tigger's lore is going up by... So you wait until you've done as many actions as you can in the turn, then you quest with Tigger.
And his 4 willpower is a little hardier than Minnie's 3.
It is, so he can survive a little easier to some of the steel decks. And then Dodge, I used to play more of that back when You Came Back wasn't in the game, but now that it is, I think that card seems a bit more effective at being aggressive. So Dodge is still a nice safety piece because it gives ward and evasive to a character, so oftentimes I would give it to Robin Hood. So that if your opponents aren't playing evasive units that have at least 4 strength, then he should probably survive, assuming there's not like a lot of AoE damage happening. And then because this deck can play a bit greedier with actions, I ran more copies of Pack Tactics with 3 here, and then 4 Pirate's Life because that's so effective in multiplayer at gaining lore and reducing your opponent's lore. And then Remember Who You Are is a nice way to draw cards as well, because if you have nothing better to do off of Robin's action, you can always refill your hand up to however much your opponent with the most cards in hand has. So that's a good way to refill your hand without really costing you too much if you can do it for free off his action. And then with this new set, I added a couple copies of the Shipwright Goofy there, the shipbuilder, because he has 3 lore, which is nice, and the ward, so he usually gets at least 1 quest off, and he can give ward to another character when he quests, so that's kind of like the Alice.
Kind of chain them together and keep protecting every next thing you play.
Yeah, so if you're close to the win, him plus whatever else you play can hopefully get you across the finish line. So I think this deck's a lot of fun. Of course, it falls flat sometimes when the actions don't line up, or if your opponents can remove Robin before he quests. That's a big part of the deck for sure. But when it is able to get all the pieces in place, it's really fun.
I know playing a Pete games referee can really put a damper on this deck's game plan.
That is frustrating, yes, and there's a lot of Pete's out there.
And then we have one last one to share with you, and this is about Maleficent's staff, so a lot of bouncing happening in this deck.
Yeah, this one was a lot of fun to make. I always wanted to get some good use out of Milo Thatch from Atlantis. I know he was a card from Into the Inklands, set 3, but he really didn't see much play because he is a 7-cost uninkable, and his effect is, maybe it's not always good, but in this type of deck, it is pretty nice because if you get the Maleficent staff down, then you get a lore every time one of a character's bounce back to, its opponent's hand. And Milo Thatch, if you can shift him up and then get rid of him on the same turn, if your opponents have a lot of characters in play, you're going to get a lore for each one that got bounced back to hand. So this could get you quite a considerable amount towards the 20 that you need to win. And so you can shift on top of the 1-cost Milo, or I've got 4 copies of Morph in here. So that's something that they might not be expecting if they just see Morph. They might not understand that a Milo might be coming down. Then some other shift lines I put in here. The new Jasmine from Azurite Sea is really cool because when she gets shifted, then each opponent's exerted character goes back to hand. So again, most people are using their characters to quest or challenge or sing. And so when this comes down, you can get a lot of value off of that. And if you have the staff in play, that's another lore for each of those. Mother Gothel, the Floodborn one, is great here because each opponent has to pick one of their characters and put it back to hand. So, if you're in a 4-person game, that's probably 3 lore you're getting off the staff there. And then the Genie on the job, just nice to have evasive units to quest aggressively with, and because he can pretty much put any character back into hand, if there's like one particular thing that's kind of threatening your game the most, you can target it with that. I think the things that target multiple things seem better in multiplayer as well, but it's nice to have a point and click removal option with Genie. And then a different line that I set up in this deck is the Ursula Deceiver of All. So there's certain times where you could double sing some songs here, so either bounce a couple things with the Mother Knows Best or refill your hand with friends on the other side if your cards are running low. Poor Unfortunate Souls also lets you bounce things that cost 2 or less. And then Heffalumps and Woozles, that's just nice card draw and also can slow down people who might be questing more aggressively than you, because this deck does take a little while to set up. But one thing I also like with this too is with all the songs combined with the muses, that's like an additional way to bounce characters back to hand. And then the Gunther, he's actually pretty nice in multiplayer because if he's banished in a challenge on your opponent's turn, then they each opponent has to bounce a character back to hand. So that sets up nicely if you have the staff in play.
And they're probably going to want to challenge him because he's got 2 lore, and you can't just let that keep taking you away toward victory for too long. So. And
then the cheap 2-cost Mother Gothel lets you, if you pay 5 ink when you play her, like a total of 5, then you can bounce a character back to their hand. The 3-cost Maleficent is interesting because you can bounce characters that I believe cost 3 or less back to their hand if you discard a card when she quests. And then the Jasmine is just an additional shift target for the 6-cost Jasmine, but she can give Reckless as well, so there's just different flexibilities there. And the Cruella from set 1 is also nice because if she's challenged and banished, then you get to pick and bounce something back to hand. So a lot of ways to do that. And then the Emerald Chromicon is one of the last things to mention. I did have a game where I had both of mine out, and so I was actually questing kind of aggressively there, and people had to start removing my stuff, and when they do, then you get to bounce other things back to people's hands. So when you have the staff out, that's really nice. But I did have a couple games where I did not find the staff until pretty late in the game, and so that it's a lot less fun when that happens. But even in some of those games, I was able to get up to like 16 or 18 by the end of it, because if people aren't like winning fast enough, when so many of your cards bounce 1 or more characters back to hand, you can kind of really delay some of their wins.
I do think in multiplayer, like as long as everyone's trying to stop whoever is closest to winning from winning, then you can kind of delay it a while, and so it does give you more time to set up some cool concepts like this that maybe you don't see play in like single player, because maybe it'd be a little too slow to make work, at least in current builds. But
yeah, we've had a lot of fun playing multiplayer this set.
Yeah, and it's fun too to know, like you said, some cards are just better in multiplayer. Like, I mean, some like Lady Tremaine, I mean, she already is very good and sees play, but in multiplayer, it's a guaranteed, like every opponent is losing a character. So things like that just feel more effective to play than like Medusa, for example. And so it's cool you can really tweak the way you're building decks to lean even heavier into that. And I know, some of these decks maybe just look like they leaned into it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you can really lean in even more heavily and gear it toward that multiplayer. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And so with that said, with Archazia's Island coming soon, do you have any ideas for where you want to go multiplayer-wise? For me, I'm thinking for set 7, I would probably definitely be building a Ruby Steel multiplayer deck. I'm very excited to try some, a deck with the new Mushu card coming out and a lot of the characters that care about challenging, like Calhoun and stuff too. Like we said, I think it's very good in multiplayer. So I'm kind of excited to try that. Maybe work in some Shere Khan from set 2 to get even more lore while you're doing your challenging and stuff like that. I'd like to pair that with at least 1 copy of the set 2 Scar too. So like if you had a Shere Khan in play and then you rush in with Scar and get multiple trades because he readies every time he banishes a character, like that could be a good way to close the game too. So I'm looking forward to trying that. How about you?
Yeah, I did try Ruby Steel, a challenging deck this set, but now having seen some of the
Getting
cards
a
for
lot
set
better.
7, it does look like it'll be a lot better. So could definitely see making enhancements to that one, but I think the Return of Hercules legendary card could be kind of exciting in multiplayer, just with so many different people potentially playing characters off of that effect.
They might thank you for playing it too.
I'm not exactly sure what the best way to build around that card might be, but I did also, for this set, I had a Steel Amethyst like mill deck that I made, but I never actually put it together and played it. So I'd kind of like to see if there's anything I can add from set 7 to tweak it a bit more and then actually bring it to the table this time around. So.
And yes, Archazia's Island is launching on March 7th. That's in 2 days from the time we're filming this anyway. So we're very excited for that. How about for single player decks with the new set? What is one that, like, for fun you're looking forward to trying, and then one that for more serious competitive play?
I think for fun, I'd like to try a Ruby Emerald, like
Okay.
damage deck.
Oh yeah, with the new Queen of Hearts.
The new Queen of Hearts seems cool, and Tweedledee and Tweedledum could potentially go in that deck, and I
could.
feel some obligation to play those twins, so maybe just throw one copy in there. But yeah, I wanted to mess around with that a little bit. I don't
Mad
think
Hatter,
it's
maybe.
I don't think it's going to be the most competitive, so I definitely say that's more on the fun side. And that's another thing I could try for multiplayer as well, because like if a lot of people have damage on them, that's kind of relevant in the way you could build the Emerald Ruby
And the Queen does
damage
say that
deck.
every character that is played takes a damage, so that'd be great with pack tactics too. If you
Yep.
just make everyone damage their characters, and then be great in multiplayer.
It would. And then as far as single, more like one-on-one style gameplay, I really am a fan of Amethyst Sapphire, so like Blurple. So I might try that some more. It's kind of the last thing I was playing at the end of set 6. But I've always been a fan of Amber Steel. I'm just not sure how popular that might be this time around. If
We'll have to see if it
Ruby
struggles
Sapphire
into the
is
new cards or not.
as popular as we think it might be, and also Sapphire Steel might give Amber Steel a little trouble.
For me, I guess for a fun deck, the moment I saw the new Hero Hamada revealed, the Emerald Sapphire one that is Floodborn, and kind of gives any character that is shifted up with, Floodborn with the card underneath it, Ward and Evasive. As we've been saying, we love that Ward and Evasive, so any quest for 3. So I think that would be really cool. So I'm eager to try like a Floodborn Matters Emerald Sapphire deck for fun. And then for competitive, I really am liking the look of Sapphire Steel this set, but it might be really popular based on what I'm hearing, and if so, like, I don't like playing mirror matches, so I might look elsewhere, but that does really appeal to me and what I like to play, because we've been really big Sapphire Steel fans.
Yeah, that looks really cool with some of the new cards.
So why not take advantage when it's looking really good? But yeah, so that's an option for sure. I know Amethyst Steel was fun during the last set, and it might not change a whole lot, but with cards like the new Giant Cobra and stuff, I'd be willing to give that a try as well. And I do think maybe Emerald Steel with the new Pirate, like the Pete, that Floodborn card, has a lot of potential too, especially if there's a lot of these steel decks, or like if Sapphire Steel's big and they're using those damage based songs, like the Pete would say you can't sing them, and also your things have an extra resist on them, so that could be pretty good there. So I'm not sure, but
another one I kind of want to try is the Amber Amethyst, like Madrigal songs type of deck.
Ooh, okay.
I think it just looks like they really tried to force some of that, or at least give the option of that being available to players now. And yeah, some of the effects there look pretty fun, and just trying to chain a bunch of songs and draw cards and kind of cycle through your deck. And yeah, I like the new Isabella as well. She quests for a lot, and also the one we had before, I think from set 4, like she can quest for 4, and this other one is a good way to kind of be protected if you can play songs with or sing songs with other characters. And I like the new Mirabelle that sings things for 3 or for 5 and has evasive, and only costs 3 to play. So she seems like she could open up some different options there.
And the one other deck I was really excited to play, now that I think of it, is an Amber Emerald, like aggressive Tramp deck with Chernobog. I've been hearing a lot about that deck, and it looks like a lot of fun to play. So I don't know if it'll end up being super competitive or not, hopefully, but I'll definitely give that a try. But yeah, so that's just some of what we're excited to try in a couple of days when the cards are finally available. And
yeah, we've got a release draft happening on Friday night, so that'll be awesome.
mm-hmm.
And then the next day, yeah, we can do a pack rush event, and there's also
Single player
going to be
then.
single player league that night, and then yeah, so it's just a lot to look forward to. And then we usually play multiplayer around, I think, Tuesdays each week, so we'll have to get something ready for that for set 7. But yeah,
So yeah, in our next video, we'll just cover, how the release weekend went, how the draft went, how the single player, whatever we end up trying, maybe the pack rush, and we'll probably let you know a couple of the coolest cards that we open based on whatever product we're able to get. So we are looking forward to that. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, and we hope you have a great release weekend. And yeah, happy questing.
Yeah, have fun out there.